As a man nearing the age of 25, some of my earliest memories revolve around watching Star Wars and looking at my dad's old comic books. I remember playing with my older brother's AT-ST about as vividly as I remember developing an interest in Spider-Man and the Avengers. Just as my interest in the Magic Treehouse was fading, I started to actually read the contents of my dad's comic books, as well as enjoy the X-Men movies and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. In short, the first two things I ever became a fan of were Star Wars and Marvel. As a longtime fan, I'm always ready to share my thoughts and opinions on a particular event or character in the MCU, and you better believe that I was ecstatic when Iron Man came out and initialized this cinematic universe unlike anything that had been made before. I can honestly say that I have yet to be disappointed with the MCU movies and the direction that the universe has taken. There are some movies and shows that have been worse than others, but there's yet to be one that I dislike. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was honestly a show for which I did not have high hopes. I figured it would be like a buddy cop show where Falcon and Bucky just fight lower level villains, reminiscing about Captain America, and ultimately setting up Sam as the next Cap. Truth be told, that's almost exactly what the show was, but it accomplished so much more than simply setting up the future of the MCU. While the action sequences were good, and while some of the newer characters were interesting, the thing I liked most about the series was a particular message that I think a lot of fans will be blind to. The message that things aren't really that simple. The message that the lines between good and bad are blurred. The message that we're all just trying to be the hero and that most of us have good intentions. At a surface level, everyone would be inclined to agree with this. Most of us like to assume the best in people, or at least we say we do. We don't like believing in things like good and evil, but rather put our faith in right and wrong. Therefore, someone can be wrong, but not necessarily bad, just as someone can be right, but not necessarily good. Something that Marvel has done phenomenally well as of late is creating villains with which the viewer can sympathize. In some cases, they're even redeemed, regardless of the level of chaos or pain they brought. However, something that I noticed about Falcon and the Winter Soldier is that a lot of people went to hating certain characters even though their motivation seemed pretty clear to me. That's what I want to talk about. There's not a single character outside of maybe Batrick the Leaper who is a clear-cut villain. If you don't believe me, just watch the rest of the video and I might just change your mind. Moving forward, there will be spoilers for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but I will try to steer clear of major plot points. The first character that we examine is Sam. He starts off the show with the mentality that certain symbols should remain untouched and uncorrupted, that only the symbol should more or less remain once its bearer is no longer with us. To drag it into modern society would be to ruin it. This mentality can be shared by a real-world view of historical figures and statues. While people won't be quick to compare Captain America's shield with a statue of Robert E. Lee, for example, the reality is that for every time period, mankind produces symbols that are representative of our beliefs. These symbols are usually born out of the achievements or the characters of individuals to the point where for long periods of time, George Washington became symbolic of liberty, Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. as symbols of equality, and Adolf Hitler as a symbol of wickedness. These symbols live on to remind us of what is right and what is wrong, but the moment we bring someone like Washington into the modern era, his symbol is weakened. If Cap's shield is used time and time again, as society itself moves forward, everything that Steve Rogers represented becomes less significant. Regardless of whether or not this was the idea that the writers and actors were trying to promote, Sam isn't wrong to think along these lines, especially given the close friendship he had with Steve. Bucky, on the other hand, believes that Sam should have kept the shield to honor the memory and legacy of Steve Rogers, who entrusted it to him. Neither one of them is necessarily wrong for their viewpoint, despite them clashing. Of course, with hindsight, we know that if the shield was going to be given to someone else anyway, it should have gone to Sam, but hindsight is relevant in the present, isn't it? Beyond these two is the new Captain America, John Walker. Wyatt Russell, the actor for the new Captain America, got a lot of hate for his portrayal. The hate ranged from those that didn't like seeing Chris Evans replaced, to people that hated Russell's character, to those that simply hated Russell's acting of said character. Interestingly, the blind hatred Russell received is evidence of the lack of understanding of what I think the show was trying to accomplish. John Walker accepts the role of Captain America because he sees it as his duty. The government gives him the role, and as an accomplished soldier who has spent his life serving the United States, Walker accepts his new mission. In interviews, Walker comes off as cocky and extremely punchable because we, the viewers, knew Captain America from the previous films. But something to keep in mind is that Walker had a role to play. He needed to appear confident in his role as a symbol to the point where the masses would love him as much as they did Steve. It isn't until we see him interacting with Sam and Bucky that we hear Walker's own opinions on the issue. He knows he isn't good enough. He knows that he can never replace Steve, nor is it his intention. All he knows is the job he was assigned and the duty he feels to complete it. Yet, despite his insistence that Bucky and Sam should work with him, he's treated rather disrespectfully by the duo. Time and time again, he is ignored or treated as though he is less deserving to fight for his country than the Falcon or the Winter Soldier. Hell, we even see Walker have plenty of moments where he actively helps those that don't listen to him or respect him. Even if you don't like the character or the actor, at least acknowledge that Lamar, who I think is an amazing character in the show with good intentions, has the utmost respect and adoration for Walker. That should tell you more about the character than anything else, in my opinion. So, what is Walker's angle exactly? I've more or less told you. He wants to perform his duty in any way that he can. His first real mission has him facing super soldiers without having his own serum. In this way, Captain America and Battlestar are punching upwards, fighting a fight that they don't have a strong chance of winning. Yet, they persist. Walker realizes that he doesn't stand much of a chance against super soldiers when he is beaten by the Dora Milaje, so when he has access to the serum, it isn't a surprise that he takes it. He even voices his concerns for taking such a substance with his partner, only to essentially be encouraged to take it. In truth, Walker goes on to only make one mistake while under the influence of the serum. It isn't attacking a man that would be labeled a terrorist by this country. It isn't avenging his fallen friend, nor is it even necessarily the bloody way in which he kills his enemy. Rather, it's doing all of these things while wearing the suit. It's doing all of these things while the world is watching their new Captain America. Such an act would have been considered noble and would be sympathized by the viewers if roles had been switched around. If Rhodey had been killed, would we not cheer for Iron Man? When Loki and Heimdall were killed in front of Thor, did we not rejoice when Thor attacked Thanos later in the film?
But Zach, that guy didn't kill Lamar, Carly did, so Walker is unjustified in killing the guy.
Interesting point to be sure, but let me ask you a question. If two people held you back as a third killed a person with whom you were very close, would you not blame all three for the murder of your loved one? Maybe not, but I know that I would. All this to say is that Walker made one mistake, which was letting his feelings supersede his role as a symbol, and in doing so he failed his mission. But can we blame him? Can we blame Walker for doing the things he did if we might have done something similar had we been in those situations? Can we blame Walker when he thinks that the world is against him after he has only ever tried to serve his country, watching his friends die as they did the same? Even if you've answered yes to these questions, can you blame him still after he does the right thing in the final episode, not once, but twice? I feel like I've spent too much time on Walker, and shall move on to Zemo. Zemo, a man that broke the Avengers, a man that kills so many people all for the sake of ridding the world of more heroes. Zemo understands better than anyone that heroes have the same capacity to make mistakes as anyone else, and yet they're praised even when entire cities are destroyed in their wake. As a result, the world is simply better without heroes. At least, this is the mentality of Zemo. And again, I ask, is he wrong? This one is a bit harder to say. Without heroes, villains can still rise and are even harder to take down. However, one can make the argument that heroes can cause just as much destruction as villains can. If Zemo can stop another superhuman from being created, he does so, especially when it comes to the serum that seems to warp the minds of those that take it. His mentality is more complex than this, obviously, but at the very least, he sticks to his code. Zemo isn't seen to do bad things outside of his mission to rid the world of super soldiers, a project he considers to be corrupt. Carter has a similar mentality in that heroes aren't all they're cracked up to be. They make mistakes just as much as anyone else, but they're glorified just because they have muscles, a cool suit, or a charming demeanor. On the other hand, men and women that serve their countries and organizations are tossed to the wayside when they are no longer needed or when they raise the objection with the status quo. As such, Carter believes that there is really no such thing as a hero. They're just individuals doing what's best for themselves, and sometimes what's best for an individual lines up with what is best for everyone. Perhaps I'm reading too much into her character, but I think we can all agree that human beings are inherently self-interested. We all do what we desire to do, or else we wouldn't do it. This process is described by psychological egoism. In short, everything we do is based in our own self-interest. Even doing our homework is born out of self-interest despite not wanting to do it because you want to get your degree. If you don't do your homework, you jeopardize your chances of getting it. Therefore, even with great figures like Steve Rogers, crashing a plane into the ice is an action born out of self-interest because Steve wants to protect the lives of others. And if that's the case, then why should someone like Carter be condemned for doing what she wanted and what she thought was right, and why should Falcon be forgiven and praised for the same? The only answer is that we arbitrarily draw lines in the sand as to what we accept and what we reject. And speaking of arbitrarily drawn lines, Isaiah Bradley was someone that gave his everything for his country, but because he wasn't a blue-eyed, blonde-haired Captain America, he was punished for doing what he thought was right. Bradley's story is easily the most tragic in this series, and I think the show does a good job of having Bradley's history mirror the issues that Black Americans have faced in this country. Regardless of one's political stances, anyone can see that Bradley's life was unnecessarily miserable and full of pain, just as anyone can see that African Americans within this country's history have also suffered needlessly. As such, Isaiah cannot possibly be blamed for his distrust of the country, the government, or the Shield. We also know that he is right to have disdain for his country, as America, both in fiction and in reality, has not been kind to particular groups of people throughout its history. In fact, the world has often put certain groups of people through needless suffering just because of the greed or the pride of a few. Yet, what's interesting is that Sam is able to more or less change Bradley's opinion of the Shield. The Shield doesn't have to necessarily represent America as it was or as it is, but rather what it could be. Lastly, the character thought to be the villain based on the trailer, but treated as the hero by the end of the series, Carly Morgenthau. Just a girl, Carly takes a super soldier serum and leads a band called the Flag Smashers with the simple idea of tearing down borders so that the planet can exist as one people. One world, one people. Carly is willing to go to any lengths to make the governments of the world understand this principle, and in truth the idea is objectively a good one, especially in the MCU where Earth was literally under attack by Thanos' army. However, it's really only a good idea on paper. Every human being on this planet has ambitions, and as a result, there's always going to be individuals and groups that seek to establish some kind of dominance of or separation from others. Even if we destroyed all borders and embraced each other as just fellow humans under the unifying banner of Earth, there would always be those that seek to establish themselves as separate. They might be seen as terrorists, or perhaps they succeed in becoming their own separate country. To boil it down simply, unity doesn't necessarily equal equality. Carly's mentality is only good as a dream, and not necessarily one that works in execution. As such, she is treated as the villain, but her mentality is never one of greed, lust, insanity, or needless destruction. The whole time she fights, she believes that what she is doing is good and objectively right. So, is she wrong for pursuing a dream that can never become a reality, even if it ought to be? Despite fighting her, Falcon ends up believing in her dream, but as a more experienced individual, he understands that it cannot and will not happen the way she wants it to. Thus, Falcon has a speech at the end of the series and is able to speak to the rest of the world. Who knows? In time, Carly's dream might become a reality, and if that's something that we, the viewers, root for, then it was likely the right fight to make, wasn't it? Taking us out of the MCU, we can appreciate how these messages and ideologies are mirrored in our own world, or at least in the United States. The reality is that our country is becoming more and more polarized with each passing year, to the point where there seems to be little to no agreement between different groups of people. Not only is there not any sort of middle ground, but each side is attacked for simply believing what they honestly and sincerely believe to be right. If you don't support BLM, then you're racist. If you are okay with abortions, then you're okay with murder. If you voted for Trump, you're a Nazi. If you supported the lockdown, then you're a mindless sheep. The reality is that all of these statements are just false. An oversimplification of a stance can ultimately unify many people behind an idea, which is why if someone is called a Nazi or a liberal snowflake, we immediately are more likely to unite with others to attack and ridicule the accused. However, complexity of issues breed antagonism. Carly's dream was simple, but her goals were large and complex, which is why the many governments of the world couldn't understand her. On the same note, they labeled her a terrorist, and that made it easy for political parties to work against the Flag Smashers. Any individual can have any number of reasons to disagree with an organization, group, or person, just as anyone can have their reasons for following the path they take. We can even take a direct issue in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and apply it to our country, which is border security. Should we be strict in policing who comes into this nation, or should we be more sympathetic to the people that desire to flee from their problems that plague their land? Is someone wrong for wanting to focus on the betterment of their own residents before they offer a hand to their neighbor? Is someone wrong for wanting to help those that they see struggling? I don't think I'd condemn either of those people. It almost sounds like every one of us has things that they care about, and nearly everyone has at least one good reason as to why they believe what they believe on any given issue. Even when we clash, it doesn't mean that one person is right and the other is wrong. We could both be wrong, and are therefore just arguing which of us is the smarter idiot. Even when someone isn't likable, it doesn't mean that their ideals and their actions are worse, nor is the opposite true. Even when reality seems so chaotic and it doesn't look like things can be fixed, we can always turn to fiction, as it has always been a medium for us to understand our problems in an objective sense, and help us look toward the ideal. It might sound corny, but maybe if we stopped focusing on the what and looked deeper into the why, there wouldn't be so much animosity. You're not automatically a bad person if you don't support a specific organization. You're not automatically a bad person for wanting to care for your own well-being. You're not automatically a bad person for seeing a common mentality in a potential leader. And you're not automatically a bad person for not wanting to put yourself in harm's way. Let's pick up that shield and use it to defend what is right instead of attacking what we perceive to be wrong. Thanks for watching.